I realized I was unmuted this entire time. Can you hear me now? I can't hear you, so if you could just put it in the chat. Okay, great. Let's go back to the beginning. So once again, today is the final lesson on debate. Now you'll know all of the speeches once you're done listening to this lesson. And Crossfire is something I haven't talked about yet, but it's like pretty simple. It's just you're asking each other questions and answering each other's questions. So there's 3 crossfires. Each one is 3 minutes long. The first one is after the constructives. The second one is after the rebuttals, and the third one is after the summaries. So first cross will be done by the first speakers, right? Whoever read the constructive. And second cross is done by the second speaker, so whoever did the rebuttals. And then grand cross is all 4 people, like everyone gets to ask questions about each other. And then typically whoever is the first speaking team gets the first question. So for example, if pro was speaking first, they would get the first question. And then if con was the first speaking team, they would get the first question. This is a great time to show perceptual dominance in front of lay judges. A lot of lay judges, like, you know, when you're reading speeches or something that's like you've pre-written, sometimes it's hard for them to understand. So it's a great time to like clarify points during Crossfire and make yourself sound really smart. They love that. A lot of lay judges will go out of their way to say that I vote off of Crossfire. So, you know, when you say things in Crossfire, that like actually impacts their decision. And you know, if you already look like you're losing or you don't know what you're saying in the first crossfire, that can like negatively affect the latter half of the round, even if you guys are like still doing really good and winning on the flow. You know, they might just not be convinced. So crossfire is still very important. And then sometimes tech judges will also care about crossfire too. But generally they don't really care about it unless something was brought up, like your opponents conceded something, and then you would bring that up in a speech, and then the tech judges would vote off of it. But usually tech judges say something like, oh yeah, you guys can use this time for, you know, whatever you need. Okay. And then the second thing is that concessions are the most important thing you want to get out of Crossfire. So this will be harder, you know, when you are against better teams naturally, but that's where you begin like asking the obvious things. So for example, if I was debating let's say like a topic on, you know, the pharma topic, like, oh, we should implement price controls on the pharmaceutical industry, I would know that one very common argument is innovation, right? A lot of people are like, once you implement price controls, you know, companies lose profits. So overall, like their innovation actually falls, right? So I would like, you know, to get some concessions, which is basically like them making an argument that like helps you in the round, I would ask something. Obviously, I'm not going to be like, oh, does innovation really matter? Of course, they're going to say, yeah, it matters a lot. Something else I would do instead is I would like think about what kind of responses my partner has or what kind of responses I would make, and then kind of set up my questions to help those responses. So for example, I know that there's this piece of evidence that says when you like implement price controls, the drug becomes cheaper and more people are able to afford the drug, which means that like they actually have the same amount of revenue or like even more because they are able to like actually have more people buy the good, so they aren't actually losing money, they're making more. So I would say like, oh, would you say that companies like main goal is profits, right? And they probably say yes, because that's the point of most companies. And then after that you say, okay, insofar as long as we can prove that like profits don't decrease or profits actually increase, we can prove that innovation doesn't go up or down, right? And then another question I might ask is like, there's a piece of evidence that says like companies actually spend the most money on marketing instead of like research and development, right? So I would say like, oh, would you say innovation is the most important part of what a drug company is doing, right? And most likely they're going to say yes, because if you don't have a drug, then you can't really sell anything, right? And if they say yes, then I would say, okay, even if these drug companies lose money, they would never actually cut their research and development budgets, because that's the most important thing to them. Instead, they would cut elsewhere, like marketing or lobbying or other things, right? Because innovation is the most important thing. So in these like wayward ways, you can get them to make concessions. Other things you can ask about other than concessions is like, if you missed a point, this isn't always like the best thing to do. You can do this like right after their speech as well. But if you really like are completely confused about their case, it's way better that you clarify during Crossfire than you're like spending the entire round like having no idea what you're talking about, right? So this is where you would say, oh, can you clarify your subpoint B on your contention 1? I didn't really catch the impact, or like something like that, right? Or, oh, what's the date on that car that you cited under your first contention? So those are things that you can ask about clarification. What a lot of your opponents will try to do a lot of time is like go on and on and on. So they'll be like, oh yeah, let me just like explain my entire case to you again for 2 minutes. And we don't want that, because that makes them more convincing to the lay judge or to, the tech judge or whatever, right? So we don't want that. You just want a really short question. And if they're trying to go on and on, what you can do is say, oh, thank you, that answers my question. Would you like a question? Don't let them just like keep rambling, right? Another thing you can ask about is contradictions they made in their speeches. Like really point it out to the judge and like make them look bad, right? So like, oh, you told me that marketing, you told me that innovation is the most important part of a company. So why would they be cutting innovation first if they lose profits? I don't know how that makes sense. Could you explain it, right? And then they have to like explain some weird logic, but it makes them look bad. And you can also ask them, like, when they have contradictory arguments, you can force them to choose one, right? You can be like, okay, so you tell me that innovation is the most important part of a company's budget, and then you tell me that they would cut innovation first. So you have to pick one. Is innovation the most important, or is it not, right? And then based on that, after they choose one, you can like further develop your responses. Another thing you can do is point out holes in their arguments. You can be like, oh, what is the internal warranting for why, price controls do XYZ? And then this is the case for like a lot of economic impacts. They'll say like, oh, once we implement price controls, GDP falls by 5% and millions of people fall into poverty. Like there's no explanation there. So you can ask like, what is the internal warrant? I didn't hear it in your case. So can we just drop this argument, right? Like, so what's the actual reasoning, right? They can say something like, oh, maybe the internal warrant is actually like price controls decrease innovation, and innovation increases GDP, which is why it leads to like economic growth, right? So you can always point out holes in their arguments. Another thing that you can do, and this is more of an advanced strategy for when you're really good at answering Crossfire questions and you're really experienced, you can go, oh, I don't have a question. Do you want a question? If you're like the first speaking team, right? Or even if you're the second speaking team, you can be like, yeah, no, I don't have a question. Do you have a question? So what this does is usually they will ask you about things that you said, right? Especially in first cross, the only thing they're going to ask you about is your case, because nothing else has been said. They're not going to ask questions about their own case. So what that allows you to do is take a lot of time explaining your case, and really like everything they're going to ask you, you can nail it down, and it makes you seem really smart in front of your judge, because they know, wow, they have a really solid case. They know what they're talking about. And then finally, sometimes they can get really pushy, your opponents, right? They might be like, oh, like they just ask a question and they're like, can I have a follow-up? And they just keep asking you questions based on what you said, because they really want to get a concession from you. But let's say you've already like spent a minute on it and you really need your own time, right? You haven't even gotten the chance to ask questions. So you're like, okay, we've spent a minute on this topic. Can I get a question? Because like we've already given you so much time on your question, right? You just need to ask that. And then you don't always have to say yes. If they're like, can I have a quick follow-up? You can just be like, no, actually, I'd like to take a question now. So that's pretty much Crossfire. So now we're going to do a drill. So William, pick a topic that you know a lot about, and then like pick a stance on it, right? So for example, you can do like, like having homework is good for students learning, or you can do like, Tesla is the best car to buy, or like I don't know like what kind of niche you're in, but like, maybe like League of Legends is the best game. I don't know what kind of topic you know a lot about, but you can just choose one and let me know, and then I will interrogate you, like pretend this is a Crossfire, but it's kind of one-sided, and then um yeah. So have you thought about one yet? Sorry, that was an echo. Do you think about one yet? I can't hear you. That is so weird.
Hello?
Oh yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. So I'll just do having homework is important, I guess.
Homework is important. Okay. Then I'll start like drilling you. Okay, so what does homework
Uh,
do
you're
to help students learn?
you cut out. I couldn't hear you very well.
Oh, I said, what does homework do to help students learn?
It reinforces ideas that were talked about in class, and they're able to make sure that they understand the knowledge that they learned in class.
Okay, so would you say that like we should prioritize a student's mental health first before we think about like other things?
No, mental health should probably be any type of health. Health in general should be considered first.
Yeah.
Considering
Okay.
it's the
So if health should be the first consideration, for a student, like even apart from like how well they do in school or like how, other things, wouldn't you say that like the stress that homework gives a lot of students makes it really hard for them to learn?
I agree, but most of the time, teachers don't give out um like uh enough homework to make you stay up all night, and even if they give you enough homework, students usually waste time in the day doing other things that, like, when they are resting, when they could be doing homework, and so they could still have a social life and still do the amount of homework they're given.
Okay, so you say that like students are wasting time, right? But like let's say they just don't understand like the homework, right? But a lot of the time we're graded on our homework, and that makes us stressed. And sometimes you just really don't understand like
Hmm.
the material. Even if you spend a lot of time on it, it's probably very hard for you to get it right, right? So wouldn't you say that still contributes a lot of like unnecessary stress?
But like the topics they go over in class are like uh necessary topics. They have to go over like in class by law, and if they didn't go through it in class, and teachers wouldn't give and that's why like tutorial exists. You can go ask your teacher after your class ends, and like ask for some and ask what this homework like means, and you can further clarify it at tutorial.
Okay, so would you say that like um a student should probably learn the course material first during like class? They should pay a lot of attention and like take notes because that's where they're gonna like learn most of the material.
Yes.
Okay, so if you agree that these class time is the most important part of learning, wouldn't you agree that homework is kind of unnecessary since you do most of your learning in class anyways?
Even though you do most of your learning in class, you don't instantly remember something just because you've heard it once. If you heard it once, you can remember it for a short period of time, but you need homework to reinforce those ideas and be able to implement them into implement them into situations where you can clearly remember the idea.
Okay, so like what's the difference between classwork and homework, right? Because a lot of the time we get assignments in class too.
So I guess classwork is learning the topic and, well, even though you get assignments in class, like, it's not really always the same as homework. And like, in class, you learn the ideas, and at home you like practice them, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, I'll stop there. That was a really good job, William. You like deflected all my answers, but I think maybe you could kind of see where I was trying to go with like
Yeah.
like the mental health thing, right? I was trying to like lead you into a trap and be like, oh, mental health is so important. Homework like damages our learning, right? But yeah, I think you evaded them really well. And okay, so now you can practice asking me crossfire questions. Is there like any specific topic you think you could like drill me down on? Like you can force me to take a stance and then I can like answer questions that you're asking me.
Well, not really. Yeah, I guess.
Maybe like, do you know like a lot about like what if I like defended a stance like Trump is better than Biden as president?
Okay.
Okay, great. So I will say that Trump is better than Biden, and then you can like ask me questions that try to destroy like my argument.
Wait, your first question was what was your first question again?
My first question is, why does homework help students
learn? Okay. Why do you think Trump is a better president than Biden?
Yeah, so first, he has great defense spending and he's made us look really powerful internationally. That's why right now we actually see a war in Ukraine, like Russia invaded Ukraine right in Europe where all of US allies are, right? During Biden's presidency. It's because Biden is really weak and he's like, been showing that he's really weak because he doesn't put a lot of effort into defense. That's why there was this war. But during Trump's like era, right, there was like no Russian invasion of Ukraine. So I would say for one reason, Trump has prevented war. And then the second thing I would say is that he actually like was able to make our trade a lot better by implementing these tariffs on Chinese goods. And that allowed us to actually create more jobs domestically in the US because now people are able, like companies are able to sell to America without having to compete with China's like super cheap goods. So more jobs have been created in the US.
Isn't it also true that Trump has made US Trump has kind of been an icon for the US for the past 4 years, and he has also been mocked a lot by other powerful world leaders?
I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by mocked, but I would say that he has a very strong stance and everyone is always going to have an opinion on Trump. But what they all do know about Trump is that he's a very strong US supporter, right? He's like, if you do anything against America, I will fight back against you. And even if that makes negative reviews, for example, like China's like, oh my God, I can't believe Trump would say something like that. It still makes them afraid of us, which is really important to stopping war. So overall, he's still like a net benefit to the U.S.
Your second point was that during Trump's time there was no Russian invasion anywhere, and because of his good defense. But in Biden's time that Russia started to invade Ukraine, isn't it just like a coincidence that Russia could have invaded Ukraine in 2018, and we still would have thought there was the same, and we don't really blame Biden for the invasion of Ukraine, because even if the invasion of Russia and Ukraine were to happen in 2018, Trump would not defend it. They would not. And since even if he is a military superpower, Putin would know that Trump wouldn't fight back, so then he would probably still attack Ukraine even if the presidents were different.
Yeah, well, I would say the unique reason why we see 2018 there's no invasion throughout Trump's presidency, there's no invasion, and only in Biden's is, first of all, that like even if we wouldn't go to war against Russia, Trump made enough deterrence which prevents war in the first place, right? He showed that the US has great nuclear power, other powers, military power, which is why Russia would never dare to start the war in the first place, whereas Biden looks weak. Second of all, Trump actually uniquely had great relations with Russia, whereas Biden has taken a very anti-Russia stance, which I would say, you know, Trump's diplomacy also helped prevent Russia from invading, whereas Biden actually, like, he didn't do any peace talks with Russia, which is why they chose to invade.
But how is it the president's fault? It's not like they get to decide whether Putin goes to war, even if like Trump had good relations with Putin and Biden doesn't. It doesn't really affect how Russia would go into Ukraine. And if Trump had good relations with Putin, then he might have been able to force the U.S. into war with them against Ukraine, which would not have been good.
Well, but we see uniquely that that didn't happen, right? You're talking about hypotheticals, but in the real world, what Trump did was his diplomacy stopped Russia from invading Ukraine because we don't want a war. U.S. doesn't want a war, and then he tells them, okay, maybe you shouldn't invade because we're like besties, and I will help you out if you won't invade. Whereas, Biden hasn't taken really any stance at all.
Okay.
Maybe you can ask about the jobs part.
Oh yeah. So you said that because Trump stopped the trade from China, he helped the trade, so then it opened up a lot of new factory jobs in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
But isn't it true that factory conditions are like very bad and some would call it like very like it's very suffocating?
I would say that actually the US has great guidelines for, factory jobs. They don't want people to get hurt or to live in horrible conditions, which is why factory jobs in the US are actually really good. But then second of all, I would say it's much better for you to have a job and be able to live in a house and eat meals rather than, not have a job and perhaps be homeless and starving on the side of the street. I would say even if you really think that factory jobs are like suffocating, it's much better to have money and be able to eat than to not have a job at all.
Okay. But isn't Biden the one that uh, um but just because factory jobs open doesn't mean that like people will be able to like people will go there, right? They might be in a very far location and they wouldn't be able to go there.
Well, that's why the people living near the factory jobs would get the jobs, right? Like wherever they open up the factory, it's probably where the most people would be able to work for a factory. Okay, that was a good job, William. Asking me questions. I think that you were kind of like running out of things to ask me towards the end, right? And another thing that you can do during Crossfire is you can ask them about things that they haven't brought up, right? So for example, if I was questioning myself, I would be like, okay, well, because the only thing I talked about were like jobs and war, and you already talked about those. Another thing you could do is like, okay, you could talk about something that made Biden really good or something that made Trump really bad, right? You can be like, for example, wasn't Biden the one who pulled us out of the coronavirus recession by passing a spending bill that Donald Trump would have never passed? Right? You can like ask targeted questions like that. Another thing you can do is like talk about what's bad about Trump, right? You could be like, oh, well, hasn't Trump actually led to a rise of domestic terrorism because of his, white supremacist ideals? Right? How does that make him better than Biden, who's actually a supporter of like racial and gender and like LGBTQ plus equality, right? So you can talk about those kind of things, and this allows you to bring in points that you might want to make in the future and like set up your partner for it. Yeah, but otherwise I think that was pretty good. One thing you could improve on maybe is like saying the context a little bit faster, because when you were like talking about the question, a lot of time you would like ask a question in like 30 seconds, right? But you don't really have that much time during Crossfire, so you want to kind of be as efficient as you can.
Okay.
Yeah, but otherwise that was really good. Okay, we have 22. Okay, so next we're going to talk about final focus. This is the last speech in the debate. What you're trying to do in the final focus is close the door. You're trying to win, right? You're trying to tell the judge, this is why I win today. No one else should be winning today. So what you do is, why do you win today's round? This is your offense, right? We talk about offense. It's everything that supports your argument. It's not just why your opponents are wrong. It's why you are right. And another really, really important thing in final focus is weighing, and especially comparative weighing and analytics, right? So you probably will have already done a little bit of weighing during your summary, right? And what you're going to do is you're going to extend that weighing, but they've also probably had some weighing, right? Let's say you're like weighing on magnitude, like, oh, we have bigger numbers, and they're weighing on probability, like, oh, there's a bigger chance that we're happening. Then you can't just repeat like, oh, we have bigger numbers, you should vote for us. The judge is like, well, they have bigger probability, like, which one should I actually vote for? This is where you do the comparative weighing, and you're like, actually, you should prefer magnitude over probability for XYZ reasons, right? So what differentiates like a debater who's just passing by from a debater who's actually really good is the comparison that you're making, right? A lot of the time, teams either win in two ways. First, they're a really good prepper. That means they have like cards for everything, and you just like, they have such good evidence, you just can't even refute it. The second is that they're actually doing comparative analysis, right? They're saying, okay, even if you believe their arguments, this is why my argument makes more sense than theirs, and that's why I actually refute their argument, right? So comparative analysis is really important. Let's talk about how you're supposed to structure the final focus. So you should spend most of the time on your case, and even if you do want to spend more time on their case, I would say spend at least 1 minute on your case, unless you're only going for like a turn on their case as your sole piece of offense. But usually you want 1 minute on your case. Make sure you always extend your link and your impact. The rules have gotten more lax recently, like depending on tech judges, but if you're like a true tech judge who's like, I'm line by line, I'm a policy debater, well, I used to be a policy debater, right? You would really make sure you're extending the full story, right? So for example, I wouldn't just say, oh, price controls actually kills 11,000 people annually because they decrease innovation. That's not the full link story. What you need to do is, price controls decrease prices so much they cut companies' profits by 30%, which decreases the amount of innovation by 30%, leading to 11,000 lives that could have been saved dying, right? So you need to extend the full link story, but it can be like shorter than, you know, what you might have said in summary. And then after you extend your offense, right, make sure you always do offense first before you do defense. Then you will weigh and do the comparative weighing, like, oh, this is why my case is more important than their case, even if you believe their entire case, right? So the weighing is really important, because this is what really shuts the door for a judge, right? When we think about it, like, the judge, you have your speech, they're going to have their speech. If there's no weighing, the judge will still be like, okay, well, you're right on some parts and they're right on some parts. Like, how are you going to shut the door and make sure your opponents have zero chance of winning? A lot of it comes from this comparative weighing, where you're telling them, even if we believe everything they say, we're still going to win. And that really shuts the door for the judge, right? This weighing can come in a lot of different ways. One of the biggest things you can talk about is things that they've dropped, because a lot of time when you go from summary to final focus or rebuttal to summary, they will oftentimes like forget to address an argument, or they run out of time. So the first thing you do is drop, oh, they dropped this argument, 100% probability, you should vote for us. And then what comes along with this is the clarity weighing, which is not always the best, but you can do it for lay judges and a lot of tech judges, if the round gets like really messy and like everyone's like confused, like there's so much stuff on the flow, you just say, judge, they dropped this argument, this is the easiest place you can vote, there's 100% probability, you know, that's why you're voting for us on this one today, right? So when the round gets really muddled, it's always nice to point out something they dropped. Otherwise, it really depends on the round, your strategy for weighing. But that's like on your case, right? That's the offense and weighing. And then on their case, you just have to boil down, and this is the same for offense too. You have to boil down to the last like key piece of defense or offense, right? Some mistakes that people often do is that they like try to go for everything in final focus, right? You had 3 minutes to talk about stuff in summary, but now you're trying to fit everything into 2 minutes. There's no way that you're going to talk about all of the same stuff unless you start speaking so fast nobody can understand you. Instead, what you want to do is you want to boil down to like your best argument, which one have they not responded to, or which one is most convincing to the judge, your best piece of offense and your best piece of defense, and kind of try to explain it well. I would say that sometimes it depends what kind of debater you are, but sometimes it can be hard for people to tell what they need to crystallize on, right? Sometimes you go for the wrong piece of offense or the wrong piece of defense. So sometimes it can be good if you go for more, if you do have extra time. Like, for example, a lot of times I've extended the wrong piece of defense in summary when I should have done something else. But if I just extended everything, you know, maybe we could have won the round, right? So sometimes it is better in that way, to extend a couple more pieces of defense or offense. And also sometimes the judge just doesn't even like believe you at all for some reason. A lot of the judges like try to screw you. They don't try to, but they have their own opinions, and they're just like, I just didn't believe that argument, right? So sometimes having some extra arguments can, what do you call it? Like, be a way to give yourself some like extra leeway just in case they don't believe in one argument or another. But yeah, that's like everything I have to say. Oh yeah, I forgot. What is another way you can structure your final focus? So one way is line by line, where you just go through every argument down the flow, right, on your case and on their case, kind of addressing the order that it was said. The other way you can do it is by voters, where you categorize each argument section, each category, like each contention or each clash, and then you go by there. So for example, one clash, like what a lot of people do is, oh, we have two voters, one is affordability and one is innovation, right? Even if your defense isn't offense, they still call a voter like a reason to vote for them. It's just main point of like clash, which is when when a lot of people are disagreeing on something, right? So for example, if I was AF, I'd be, my first voter is affordability, and then talk about my offense, which is like, you know, when we cut price controls, drugs get cheaper, save lives. And then I would say my second voter is innovation. So my opponents try to tell you price control decreases innovation, but actually they missed this evidence, blah, 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 blah. And that's why you can't vote for them. That's also, you know, another voter for us, right? Other times you can also group things. So those are like two separate arguments, right? Affordability versus innovation. You can't really like group them together in one. But a lot of times what you can do is you directly clash on something, like a impact, right? So for example, both of your impacts can be economic growth. So you can be like, okay, judge, we have two voters. The first one is going to be economic growth. And then you talk about both your side and their side of the debate about economic growth, right? So for example, you could say price controls increase economic growth because people now they're like spending less on medication, which doesn't really do anything on increasing like productivity or other things. Now they're spending this on buying like a car or putting it in savings, which like, you know, increases the GDP by X amount. And then, you know, the opponents might be saying, oh, price controls decrease innovation, and innovation is really important for GDP, so GDP falls. So you can be like, okay, which is more, like, through that one, by framing it as one voter, you can address both at the same time, right? You can be like, okay, we tell you very specifically, once people have more disposable income, they can buy things, which increases GDP. They're telling you that innovation is somehow linked to GDP. We would say medical innovation is not that important to GDP overall, which is why you're looking to our case first. So that's like the voter format where you just group everything about like similar things together and then talk about it in one voter. Okay, sorry, that might have been a little confusing. Do you have any questions?
So pretty much final focus, you just like try to work on try to make sure like try to just like support your case and like like just wait, so be defensive, I guess?
No, you want to, the most important part of final focus is offense, because this is, you're telling the judge, this is what you're going to write on your RFD or reason for decision when you vote for us, right? This is the reason you vote for us. And then you talk about your offense. So offense is the most important part of final focus. But you know, you still have to do some defense. But I would say like, this is really just kind of summarizing everything in the debate in a really compelling reason to vote for you.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Then that is all I have for today. So I will see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.